Hey y'all, and welcome back to another video of My Creative Life with Kel Sweetie, where we read books and we make art. Today we are discussing my January wrap-up. Now, as I'm recording this, it is January 30th, and to be honest with you, if I wait any longer, one, I do not think that I'm going... Sometimes you just gotta call the month. And this month was a really great month for me in comparison to how I usually read. And I'm calling it. I'm calling it on January. I'm like, that's it. I think we're done with the books I'm reading this January, because the I Love Black Horror Readathon is coming, and I have a lot of books on that TBR, which that video will be coming out after this one. But if I wait any longer, one, I know I'm going to be so busy making recommendation posts and hopefully really being involved with the community on Discord and Fable and all these other places that I will not have time to edit videos. And as we've learned, time is never enough for me to make these videos. So one, I'm shooting both my TBR and my wrap-up video today because y'all didn't get a December wrap-up and you didn't get a January TBR from me, because January decided like it had wheels on while at the same time being about 3 months long. So I was busy surviving in every way of the word. I am so excited to tell y'all about my January wrap-up though, because I was on fire this month. And all of my reads for the most part were really great. There were some that weren't, and we'll get to those, but I'm very happy with this month. I'm hoping that I can kind of keep the same momentum. It feels good. This year feels very good for my reading. I don't know if that's false encouragement or courage I may have by starting out the year so well and just being all wrapped up in all the bookish things of it all, just to cope. But I do feel good about these books that I read this last month, and I can't wait to share them with you. So let's get into the intro and let's get into it. So if you notice, my area looks a little different. I don't know if I even paid attention or showed that like my little reading nook area looks slightly different. That's because my unhaul reorg video still has not come out. Is it coming out in February? Who knows? You know? I don't. It's looking like March. Keep it a buck. It's looking like March. But I am happy with it. I've got a couple of trinkets now on the shelves because I've made room by unhauling. It's wonderful. It's gorgeous. I love it. The best thing is that on this little shelf that y'all can barely see in this shot is my TBR shelf. And not to be confused with my physical TBR shelf that has all of my physical reads that I pull from every month in order to plan out what I'm reading for the month. But like, I'm trying to do something where I'm planning like every quarter in advance, or if I pick up a new book or something like that, it slides into this area, because I've realized that keeps me on track. And when I do have that, I don't have to ask the question of what book am I reading next. It's already there. It's gorgeous. It's wonderful. I love it. Here's a little stack. This is my January TBR stack. I love January because it just meant that I could read whatever I wanted, because there really wasn't a heritage to celebrate, and I still read some really great stuff. So my first read of the month was American Rapture by CJ Lead. This was our sweet read pick for the Sweethearts Book Club over on Fable. Perfect time to be reading this. It's a little too close to home. I really love this. I've not read Mayfly. I figured I should read this first because it felt closer to like what I look for, because a lot of people have told me Mayfly is kind of close to extreme horror. Like, it's not extreme horror, but it's a gateway drug to it. And I would say that this kind of is a gateway to that, even if like sexual trauma is the conversation around the extreme horror. I know that there were some parts of this book that were extremely rough for me to read. It has to do with the world ending by a virus that essentially sets all your neurons off all at once, ending in you becoming some sexual maniac zombie, essentially. And it was extremely scary to read about. But also what was kind of scarier than the zombies was, of course, the the Christian religion rhetoric that our main character, Sophie, has had to deal with her entire life and is now upended when she starts to find her survival family during this apocalypse because her parents have passed and she's looking for her brother. I felt like a book like with that type of plot could easily get trapped into stereotypes and all of that. And I felt like, as somebody who grew up in the Bible Belt, it really approached every aspect of how, specifically Christianity, is inbred in the American fiber. Like, absolutely inbred in the American fiber, in American politics, period, which is such a big thing to be talking about right now as we're sitting in the administration that we're sitting in right now. It talked about men being bisexual and the conversation regarding that. It talked about our main character is also dealing with a boy who she knew before the apocalypse basically happened. And he's going to the Catholic Christian school that she goes to. She finds out at one point that he's not Catholic. And she's like, well, why do you go to the school? And as somebody who, for basically until high school, went to organized religion private schooling and was not Lutheran, was not Catholic whatsoever, it is a big thing, especially when you're growing up in the Bible Belt in the Midwest, that many people who do not believe in that sect, saying that they're not Christian is kind of a big jump, to be honest with you, because being in the Midwest, almost everybody is born and raised Christian, is a very normal thing because that's where the money is. Private schooling, almost all of the private schools I knew of in the Midwest growing up were all Christian based. They were all funded by the church. Otherwise, you were going to public school. And I think that that's something that people who don't grow up in the Midwest even think about. Like, you know, they're having conversations like charter schools and stuff like that. But no one's really talking too much about, like, why is that? And there were many situations as far as just social structures, how we view people who are Christian, how Christians view others who don't follow these rules, the idea of Christian versus Catholicism. These two things are very, very different. As somebody whose family is Baptist, and I went to Catholic school when I was in middle school, and my mother turning to me during my middle school graduation and going, they're all going to drink out of that same cup. Or the amount of up, down, of kneeling, or why do all y'all know the song? I didn't know we had practiced. Why do I not know any of the songs? It's a huge culture shock, regardless, and that's a conversation, you know, regardless of the fact that at the meat and bones of the religion, you're like, aren't these things all the same? And it's like, no, they're not. And why aren't they? And the conversation of what's true and what's not true, and who cares? There was a lot in this book. A lot was covered by CJ Lee in this book, and I loved every last bit of it. I cannot wait to start to talk about it with the book club this weekend. By the time this comes out, we would have already spoken about it, and I hope it's gone well. But this really moved me, and I think that this was an amazing book to especially be reading right now. Will I get to Mayfly eventually? Sure. But I don't expect to love Mayfly as much as I love this, because as y'all know, I love political commentary, metaphors, or whatever in my horror. I just eat it up. So, and this was perfect for that. I ended up giving it, I think, 4.5 stars, or maybe a 4 flat. And the main reason for that was our main character was annoying in like the first, I want to say, quarter of the book, before everything starts to hit the fan. I realized by the time, and for talking in the book club from others who had read the book, I realized that that was on purpose, that she was supposed to be extremely naive to the point where you were annoyed at the decisions she was making. And even to basically the end almost, I was still annoyed with the decisions she was making and the things that she was saying, and the fact that she just wasn't getting that she was in danger, that you are no longer in the cult. You are out there, and you're out here when an apocalypse is happening. It was really annoying at first, and then I realized that it was supposed to be that way because she hadn't experienced anything. She was naive. She was making decisions that didn't make any sense because her brain really could not process what was going on. And as the book goes on, that becomes less and less so. And I could notice that it was becoming less and less so it made it clear that, like, how it was in the beginning before things really started happening in her day-to-day was supposed to be annoying to you as somebody who felt like she wasn't mature. But it was still like, I'm not enjoying this. So I had to kind of knock it down a star, mainly because of just the experience of that, regardless of the fact that I understand why it was done writing-wise for the whole story. Regardless, I would recommend this in a second. I've already started to recommend this book in like recommendations and themes that I've been doing, and expect me to keep on giving recommendations to this book. This was amazing. CJ Lead did her thing on this. The next novel that I read for January was a huge departure from American Rapture, and it was White Oleander by Janet Fitch. So I have watched the film many times. Heartbreaking film. Absolutely heartbreaking. I've always wanted to read the book. Found it at a thrift store. Loved this copy. It was in really good condition, and it was a hardcover. As y'all know, I love a good thrift book find. I'm always going and trying to see what they have. And so I figured, okay, I'll pick this up. Now, here's the thing. I realized once I basically was almost done with the book that I had been reading the abridged version. So if you decide to listen to the audiobook on this, know that the unabridged version does not exist at your libraries. It doesn't. I did a whole bunch of research. I went down the rabbit hole, Reddit feeds and all of that. Apparently, it only exists on CD, and that's the only way that you're going to get it because they've only ever made the abridged versions for some reason. I'm not certain as to why, but even reading the abridged, I still had an amazing time, a heartfelt, heart-wrenching time reading this book. The movie is just the tip of the iceberg. It did very, very well in portraying the book. I will say that. But what I loved is that we got a lot more of the backstory behind, you know, the death. We got a lot more in regards to, like, you know, Ingrid and why she was the way she was, Astrid and her experience being in these different places, in these different homes, and turning into these different characters and personalities in every single place she went to. I will say at the end, there's this very realistic, I feel like, ending, although it may not be satisfying to some. I don't really want to say what the ending is because I really do recommend reading this book, especially if you're into heart-wrenching lit fic type of thing. But the ending was just a reminder that having selfish parents and being aware of that and letting them know they're selfish does not mean that they're gonna clean up their act, that they're going to decide to change. You can hope for it, but it's not, you know, they've spent how many years being this person. And although in your heart you would hope that if somebody that, you know, they absolutely love told them, hey, you're hurting me by your actions, they would change. Unfortunately, that just isn't always the case, more times than not. And that's not the case in this book. I'll just say that. I won't give away everything on what happens. Even if I told you the ending, the ending is minuscule in the grand scheme of the journey of Astrid and who she becomes. And I absolutely loved it. I know it's not a horror and it's more of a literary fiction. I'm due one every like 3 months or so. But I absolutely love this. And even though I read the abridged version and I realized that when I was almost done with it, I still didn't feel like I was cheated out of the book. In all honesty, it made me wonder, oh my God, if that's what I got out of the abridged, if I read the full length of it all, what would that be? Now, will I ever read the full length of it all? I'll have this book. I hope so. Maybe one day when I have some time. But as y'all know, I never do. But I do recommend it. I highly, highly recommend it. And I think that the casting director did an amazing job casting Ingrid and all of them. I think the movie is just as heart-wrenching as the book. And I think that that's sometimes hard to do. One thing I've learned from reading books from movies that I've loved is the book is always better. And I think this was an instance where they actually did it right. Who's surprised? It's Oprah. Oprah produced it, so. Next, Bloom. I finally read Bloom, y'all. I wish that I did not know how this ended. I wish that I didn't know what so many people read Bloom that there was no way to tell the plot of the story or say why it was a horror or whatever without, and even looking at the cover, without you knowing what this book was already about, which is lesbians and cannibalism. And just that alone, you're sitting there and you're like, oh, I want to read that. It's about lesbians and cannibalism. Here's the thing, though. That's supposed to be the twist. The cannibalism. So because I knew the twist of the end, I kept waiting throughout the entire novel. Or rather, I was looking at our main character and going, you're dumb. There are so many red flags as to this person, who they are, and you continue to keep trying to make this relationship happen when she's literally giving you an out. You could be out of here. Now, the intensity of what ended up happening in the end and how it kind of played out, I didn't see. I think that I would have enjoyed this novel so much if I did not know everything everyone has said about the book already, which is just 2 words of lesbian and cannibalism. For anybody who may be sitting there and is like, well, you just ruined it. Literally, if you've heard of this book, if you were to even look up the book, if you look at the cover of the book, it all gives it away. There was no way for me to talk about the book without saying either one of those buzzwords, and both of those buzzwords are kind of the whole point of the ending of the book. Now, I think it was still written really well. Again, I thought that our narrator was pretty stupid. She was making dumb decisions left and right and was just giving a lot of lack of self-worth. Like, she needed somebody to love her in order for her to feel worthy. And, well, she got it. She got what she wanted. That's all I can say about it. I'm not going to tell you necessarily how it all, like, works out or anything because, you know, I still think that it was a good book, and I just think that I would have enjoyed it so much more if they would have chose a different cover. 2, if there was something else for the twist at the end that anybody else could necessarily talk about in order to sell the book. Because if you left out the conversation of cannibalism, you're just like, it's 2 lesbians. That's it. You have to talk about the cannibalism in order for any horror reader to go, oh, I want to pick this up. So there's that. I think that if this short story was in a magazine and somebody didn't know what it was about and everything, this would have been amazing. Still really liked it. I understand why it gets all of its hype. I just feel like because you know the ending, you spend the entire book yelling at the main character, quit being dumb. Quit making these dumb decisions. You could be out of here, and you're not. That last book, I liked it, okay? Now, it had some issues here and there, but I liked it overall. The Cabin at the End of the World, I did not like. I said this, and I guess my timing and because of me being who I am and what I post on my stories over on Instagram, people were in a very big disarray on me saying I'm not reading any more Paul Tremblay. And people were like, what did he do? What did he do? I'm like, guys, I read books and I don't like his books. But timing's important. I, at the beginning of last year, tried to read the Paul Bearers Club. Loved the concept. Absolutely loved it. Hated the execution. Hated the execution entirely. To the point where I was just like, you don't know what you wrote. Sat here and tried again because I like this movie a lot. And it's based on the movie. Now, knowing that I hadn't watched the movie, I was like, okay, got it. Now I just need to compare. I'm going to get more information in this than the movie. Here's the thing, you don't. You don't get... The movie did an amazing job. I feel like the movie did a better job at the ending and did an amazing job at conveying everything that happens in this book in the film without making it a 3-hour film. It was amazing. Absolutely loved it. The book sucks. I think that I just really don't like Paul Tremblay's writing. I don't like... He's not great at character development. All of his main characters are selfish assholes, for lack of better terms. Like one of the dads in this book, I forget which one he was. Yeah, I don't know which dad, what his name was or anything. But one of the dads in this book, he just was horrible. He was selfish. Let me tell you something. If you've ever seen the movie, you know that it's real. Like, what the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse essentially show up at this couple and their child's door while they're on vacation in the middle of the woods. They say the world's ending, and the only way you can stop it is if you choose one of y'all to die. If not, the world will end. That's the synopsis of the plot. I think in theory, that's again an amazing plot. Because if some 4 people in the middle of the woods and you're a queer couple with your adoptive Asian daughter showed up and started spouting things about the apocalypse and how the Lord sent you, you'd be sitting there and you're like, this is a hate crime. Which they go through that whole situation. They go like, yo, like you're crazy. This is a hate crime. This, that, and the third. And that was, I could appreciate that, and I liked it because it was a very realistic interpretation of how people would usually go through that. Like, yes, I would not. Why would I believe you? Like, why would I think that like that's true? That started to wear thin when you got about this part of the book. Like, you're past the third of the book, and you're still having these conversations about whether or not this is real, whether or not you'll off each other, whatever the case is. That's the entire book. The entire book is essentially this couple going back and forth with these four people on if you're going to stop the end of the world by offing one another, just one of y'all. While also both of these people are sitting here trying to protect this child who is just disassociating the entire time. So it just wasn't enjoyable because it felt like, okay, are you going to write the story? Because that's just the plot. You haven't moved anywhere. And everybody, I just felt like Andrew. It was Andrew. And this Andrew guy was just selfish. And the way that it ended, I could not see anybody who actually truly cared for their child making a decision like what happened at the end. It went from something that was inventive into something that was extremely depressing and unfortunate, and not in a way that felt very like, you know, not all the time people are going to do the right thing, you know, even if you're put in this situation. Instead, it didn't feel that smart. It didn't feel as smart as I think that he thought it did, which I've heard from talking to other people. That's an ongoing concept with Paul Tremblay, is that the books he's writing are not as smart as he thinks they are, which I can see that. I can definitely see that, and I'm tired of trying. That's strike two. Usually, if an author strikes out for me twice, you don't get 3 strikes. 2 strikes, you're out. I don't have time. There's too many books I could be reading. So I think that'll be it for Paul Tremblay. And I'm going back and forth on unhauling this book because I did not enjoy the actual book, but I did love the idea of the plot, which is just, it's unfortunate. And I feel like I want this on my shelf, but I don't support it being on my shelf. Another novel that I feel like the author thought it was smarter than what it was We Used to Live Here by Marcus Cleaver. I don't say that meaning that I did not somewhat enjoy the novel. Let me say that. I can understand why people love this novel. I can understand why it's gotten all the hype that it's gotten. But I also realize that a lot of those people who have given it all of that hype did not read House of Leaves. But I was talking about it. I did a review for it, and somebody had mentioned, or I think I put it in the Discord. Who knows? Too many platforms now. But I had mentioned my feelings towards it, and somebody said, I once heard it described as House of Leaves for dummies. And it can't be more true. Let me see if I can, is it up here? So this is my wonderful edition of House of Leaves. If you don't know, House of Leaves is still one of my top books of all time. It is unlike any other reading experience I've ever had ever, and I don't think that I'll ever read something that makes me feel like it made me feel when I read this ever again. There are puzzles upon puzzles. There are different fonts. There's research. There's misleadings. There's places for notes. There's letters. There's pages that just are complete ramblings. There's colored words. There's so many puzzles in this book, and that's why I love this novel, because in experiencing the novel in its entirety, you become a character of the novel. You become Johnny Truant. You become this insane person trying to figure out and take apart the puzzle that is House of Leaves. It is insane. I don't know how Daniel Lewski did it. And to be honest with you, he wrote another book, and I don't think he was able to fully achieve what he made with this book. In the time that he made it, the message boards, the boom of the internet and everything, this is the equivalent of the Blair Witch Project, where people were honestly like, what is real and what is not? You have to look things up. Some things didn't exist. Some other things do exist. Why do they exist? How does this relate to another thing? The amount of research that had to go into making this book It's insane, and it created a life all of its own. And that's what makes this book scary, because it feels like it has a soul. Once you get locked into it, you feel like something is behind you 24/7, because it makes you unwell. Love it. Absolutely love it. I know that it's not a book for everyone. Just looking at the chunkiness of it, the amount of focus and involvement that goes into reading this book, it just, the girls who get it, get it. This is about, I want to say 300 pages, has a couple of codes that are pretty easy if you've ever had to do any brain teasers. You have to look up maybe a couple of things here and there. And it's about a house that has a life of its own. And essentially sounds like it's a lot like the house in House of Leaves, where it's this ancient old home that has been here before anybody else was. And it is this portal of some kind to something, and we don't know what. And it lives and it wants, and it's past understanding. I feel like, and it's clear that Marcus Clearwater was a huge fan of House of Leaves. Here's one of the biggest things as to why I'm like, you're a House of Leaves fanatic. This is one of the first interior pages. See that? It's notes, it's maps, it's keys right here. These symbols show up in another place in the book. All of that, okay? You remember that. This is one of the interior pages of House of Leaves. It's got keys, it's got sayings, it's got all this. All of this that you're seeing on this first page has to do with things that seem random in the book. And you can only realize that these symbols that are down here at the bottom, again, here's some more symbols down here at the bottom, show up in a random place in the book. And you have to remember, where did I see those symbols before? Oh, I saw them here. Oh, what does that have to do about the book? Oh, it has to do with how Johnny Truant is currently. Why is there a bullet? Why is there a compass? AMP? What do all these things mean? That is one of the big things for the entire novel. And as you can see from seeing that page, and of course in the back there's tons of other full color pages of just other memorabilia that would make sense for the book. Those pages, the interior of this one and the interior of that one, are essentially identical in idea. That's why I knew once I came across something in the book, oh, go back to the interior page. There's got to be a symbol code somewhere over there. Because almost everything in the book feels like it was simplified and lifted from House of Leaves. I think that the book was enjoyable to read, and at one point when I realized that there were codes in it, because I was listening to the audiobook, I do recommend, if you're going to read this book, read it physically, because the audiobook I think does its best. And I think if you're listening to the audiobook while reading the novel, it's the best thing you can do. But it took me a while because you're listening to the audiobook and you're hearing the Morse, but you don't know if it's Morse or feedback when it's actually Morse, which, by the way, there's a Morse code to break throughout here. Once you realize that it's Morse, it basically takes 2 seconds to decipher it. Again, it's just like, it wasn't as fun as House of Leaves because there just wasn't as much to figure out, and the clues just weren't smart enough, in my opinion. And it was like, it had all of these documents of things that seemed random in and around the town where the house is. But of course, again, because I'd read House of Leaves, I knew like, oh, they're not random. They'll pop back up someplace in the book, which sure enough they did. Like these things started to add up together, that they were all related to the house somehow, or all were trapped in the house somehow, or whatever. Again, I think if I had never read House of Leaves, I would have thought that this was really amazing. Because I've read House of Leaves, because I love House of Leaves so much, this instead felt like a beginner's guide to House of Leaves, which can be good if it's kind of like given to somebody like, hey, love House of Leaves, I know you don't have the attention span for that, pick this up instead and you'll have a fun time. You don't know what you're missing. Then I think it's perfect. And I still had a pretty good time reading it. I think the main thing and my biggest issue with this is that I think the book, the whole plot was made on Reddit. Like, apparently this was a Reddit plot that had been fleshed out and then bought, and that's how this book came to be. And I don't think that the Clearwater I don't think that he figured out an ending. I think he kept on building out the story in series that he was releasing on Reddit, which I think was probably extremely interesting when it was coming out. And he never wrote it in a way that was supposed to be contained. And you can tell because at the end, it feels extremely unsatisfying. It doesn't feel like it has an actual ending. It doesn't feel like, oh, this makes sense. Nothing at the end says, and we reach the end. And the thing is that with House of Leaves, you may be like, well, you know, isn't that what happened with House of Leaves? There was something that was satisfying enough for it to be, oh, this is where this story ends with House of Leaves. That still felt contained. As opposed to this, that kind of felt like our main character just all of a sudden lost it in a very short amount of time. And then you're kind of like, well, was she in an insane asylum? Did she get taken out by the last page? Is she just like doing this from the insane asylum? Like, there's a lot of unanswered questions at the end of this, and not in a way that goes, oh, I just need to put together more of the pieces of the puzzle of the book, but rather the book was never really, the plot was never really created in the first place for there to be a conclusion of any kind. So, yeah. I think that the only reason why I'm not more impressed by this book was mainly because I had read House of Leaves. If I hadn't, I think that I would have had an amazing time with this, and I think that I would have became obsessed enough to go, maybe I need to read House of Leaves. So, and another character who was making decisions that didn't make sense. That was like also the ongoing theme I'm realizing for January was, let's read about main characters who are making piss poor decisions. Just, they make no sense, no logical sense. We're going off the vibes. Like, that is what our main character, what was her name? Eve was doing. I just felt like Eve was never making any decisions that made logical sense. There are many things that said, this house is not a good house, but y'all bought this house anyways. And I feel like that's the thing with a lot of haunted house stories. That's kind of why I'm like, okay, what are you gonna do different with a haunted house story? Is when it's clear that the house really is not good. Like, it keeps on getting on the market, it keeps getting sold, there's bad vibes, there's stuff in the house, like people just left out of nowhere. Like, why would I buy a house that had all that stuff in there? You're not asking enough questions. That's how I felt about this. I did like it. I feel like the only thing that ruined it was the fact that I've read La House of Leaves. I would still recommend it. If you've not read House of Leaves, I still recommend this book. There you go. My final read for January, because I was on such a roll. I did not think I was going to get to this book. This book was nowhere near my TBR. These last two books, I didn't even think I was going to get to at all. Like, I was just like, they're just sitting on my TBR shelf. Chain Gang All-Stars. I finally read Chain Gang All-Stars, y'all. Yeah, deserves every last bit of notoriety and awards it has received. I literally finished this last night and had to take multiple breaths to keep from basically spiraling. The thing that is amazing about this book, and the thing that is unfortunate that I've not heard enough in people reviewing this book, because everybody was telling you, read Chain Gang All-Stars, read it, this is amazing. I just did not hear enough people talk about what this book was trying to do and what this book should have done to those people, and that's radicalize them. Talking about prison reform. This novel is about the prison industrial complex, how it is affecting our community and how it's affecting our morals. How we feel like it is okay if somebody does wrong to simply torture them for the rest of their lives. Because that's essentially the way that the prison industry is set up right now in the US. It is torture. It is not punishment by means of basically removing you out of everyday society, but simply putting you in the worst conditions in the world, putting you in unlivable conditions in the world, and expecting you to not lose your mind, expecting you to somehow survive, which is not anything that wasn't that I already knew. But the thing is that you're sitting here and you're hearing fact after fact after fact, because the novel itself is written out of research. It's not just, oh, I came up with some things here and there. It's based on research. Every other chapter has these footnotes, like Centoya Brown, which, if you haven't heard of Centoya Brown, here you go. Centoya Brown was forced into prostitution and was initially given a life sentence at age 16 for killing a man aged 43. while defending herself. Centolla, Centolla, Centolla. All across the world, women regularly serve prison time for killing their rapists. One of the main characters, Stack, that's how she ended up in jail. And it talks about plenty of other people as well. It talks about the 13th Amendment and how basically it allows for slavery. There's just so much that I mean, even from the point of view of the U.S. is the only place that has their prison system have solitary confinement. No other country has solitary confinement. How inhumane solitary confinement is, that some people have been in solitary confinement for 40 years. There's evidence of people being in solitary confinement for 40 years. Not hearing your voice or seeing somebody else for 40 years, you are going to lose your mind, and they want you to. It's insane. It's to hear about that happening even in the book, in the concept of some dystopian, very close future. And then there's the games themselves, which of course, a lot of people may read this and go, oh my God, like that's the possibility of a future. Here's the thing. They're simply writing about the past. We all just sat here during the holidays and went to go see a film about prisoners who are fighting to the death while people watched in order to gain their freedom. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, that's Gladiator. That is Gladiator, which is based on history. That's what the Romans did. It's the reason why we have football. Football games are based on gladiator stadiums. That's simply what the chain gang All-Star games are. They are literally gladiator games. That is what they are. And for years, we've said, numerous movies have been made about the gladiators and everything, and we watch them and we cheer and we all this other stuff, but we don't think about the fact that, one, that's actual history, and we don't think about the fact that these are actual people who were forced to essentially kill another person in order for them to live another day. The point is that, like, he simply took the gladiator games and said, okay, let's put that maybe 20 years in the future. Because the technology they're using basically treats it like it's a reality television show, 24/7 surveillance. All of the characters, while we're following Thurwar and Stax for the most part of the book, we hear the point of views of so many prisoners throughout these games, throughout the US, who aren't even in these games, who are just simply in the prison, and how they ended up there. And it is heartbreaking, because the fact of the matter is that while this is written as a fictional story, it is written with supporting facts. So at this moment, as I'm talking to you, somebody is literally dealing with the things that are happening in this novel right now. And to think about that is something to spiral about. Is something to become radical over. Even the conversation of the people who are protesting here and learning that tear gas can't be used in war because it's called chemical warfare, but they use tear gas to disperse crowds. You use it on civilians, but you're choosing not to use it in war. Or to hear about rubber bullets and to be reminded that just because they're called rubber bullets, majority of the rubber bullet is not rubber. And that rubber bullets have numerous times and on numerous occasions maimed and killed people. And they're used on civilians in groups, in crowds. It's a lot to read. It's addicting, unfortunately, to also read, because the way that it is written, you are also very, very interested in learning where all of these lives go. But it's extremely hard to read when you put in the context of the fact that this is life. This is what's happening right now. And unfortunately, a lot of people have read this book, said that it was an amazing book, and read it as if it was fiction. And the problem is that it was simply the characters who were fictional, not their situation. It deserves all the accolades it's ever received. It is a 5-6 star read for me personally. It's a top read for me. Expect me to be giving out plenty of recommendations. I'm a day late and a dollar short, but I still feel like people have not read this the way that need to be read, and I will be giving so many people hell for not reading this book. Because it is amazing, and I feel like I heard so many people saying you need to read this book, but I did not hear enough people saying why. And that is where the problem is, because we need to talk about why this is an important book. Not simply that it was a really great story, but what it is supposed to do to you. Absolutely loved it. And I'm so happy that I had enough time and I decided, I'm going to read this. and it'll be a good way to transition into Black History Month. And it absolutely was. No regrets whatsoever. I'm concerned because of how much I love this book that the next book needs to be really good. Because it's like one of those things where it's like, oh, that could put me in a slump because of the hangover, which I kind of started a little bit of next month's reading challenge already just because of how many books I have. And I'm already kind of reading it and I'm going, there's a lot of world building here before we get to anything. So I'm giving it a moment. I'm giving it just a tad bit longer. Absolutely love Chain Gang All-Stars, and I will not say it enough. Everyone should be reading this. If you live in the US, you should absolutely be reading this, especially where we are right now. That is my January wrap up, y'all. I had, as you can see, a very interesting reading month. I had a couple amazing reads. American Rapture, Chain Gang All-Stars, both of those were extremely great. White Oleander, loved. Now, We Used to Live Here, I think was a letdown simply because of my prior reading. And I hated The Cabin at the End of the World. Hey y'all, it's editing Kelsey. Do I look a mess? Absolutely. Did I try to make this a voice note? Certainly so. Did it end up being like nearly 6 minutes? And I was like, nobody wants to just see a freeze frame of me smiling while I talk about what I need to talk about for 6 minutes? Absolutely. So here we are. Popping in here real quick because I realized while editing, I completely forgot a whole novel. I read at the very beginning. It was the first novel I read all month. And once I get to the end of this, you're probably going to know exactly why I forgot it. It's probably because I was trying to forget it. And I was thinking of just leaving this out, but some of the things I had to say about the book I think were really important. And that's why I'm sitting here on camera with you looking horrible as I do when I'm editing this stuff for y'all. So let's get right back into it. Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellors. I hated. Absolutely hated. I gave it a 1.5 star at the time that I'd finished reading it. Now thinking back on it, I would probably give it maybe a 1. And I don't even know if I would give it a 1. It's maybe even a 0.5 star. I wouldn't recommend it. Like, let's start there. Like, I just wouldn't recommend it. Mainly one, I read this book and it was completely out of my usual genre because I try to fit every now and then something of a different genre just because every now and then there's one that'll surprise me. White Oleander, completely not of my usual genre. Absolutely loved it. This I hated. I tried to do a slice of life, Sally Rooney-esque type of novel because so many people lose their minds about it in the book community. And I was just like, well, let me just try it just to see. No, I hated it. I couldn't care less. All of the people in that novel suck. And not even in an interesting way. They suck in a very boring, whitewashed, vanilla type of way. There are characters of color in that book, and I put air quotes around it because honestly, if Mellors had not told me, hey, this character is such and such, I would have never been able to tell you that those characters were characters of color. And I think also at the same time, I hate when an author writes a character of color and they go, the Black, the Latino, the Asian, because what's crazy is they never say the white character. They default that you've already thought that that character is white. And that's because of your lazy writing. If you've written them properly and understand the cultural and character and what they would be just communicating with their community, the reader should be smart enough to realize that that character is a certain way. And that's not feeding into stereotypes, that's understanding culture. There is one character, Santiago, who is Latino and immigrant, and you could not tell that from any of his personality whatsoever. You literally could not. There is a biracial Black girl who's in there, who's like the main character's sister. You couldn't have told me that she was a Black girl. There is a slight moment where she talks about the fact that she struggled with the fact of being Black enough, but you could tell. It's like 2 seconds, and it's not even a real exploration of that conversation because Coco Mellors could not have that exploration and that conversation because she's never heard that actual conversation from somebody. And you can tell that. There were 2, I think, Asian characters within it. Again, you could not tell from actually reading the characters that they were Asian characters. I personally think that it is lazy writing to sit there and not know how to write characters of color. As an artist, I don't want to just write or draw Black people my entire life. I want to read and draw and create things that are from not just my identity, because I want to learn those identities and learn how to express those identities out in the art that I make. I think that that's a sign of somebody who is a really great artist. Here's the thing, that takes skill. The conversation of white authors writing characters of color or straight authors writing queer characters does not come from the fact that, like, no one ever, well, personally, I'll speak for myself, no one doesn't want you to write those characters whatsoever. The conversation comes from a point that the actual people of those communities do not receive the publishing and publicity that they should receive writing those characters themselves out of identities that they know personally. So it's a slap in the face when white authors receive that publicity and that promotion to write those stories that they know nothing about. And this is a great example of that. Coco Mellors did not know how to write characters of color and included them, and even, in my opinion, queer characters, and included them in this novel simply to tick boxes that it wasn't just a group of white friends. But she wrote a group of white friends. And I also don't find it great that the queer main character of the story ends up being strung out on drugs. It felt outdated. It felt like, did you steal that storyline from the 80s? Like, it definitely felt extremely outdated for the time that we're in to make the most open and out queer character of the novel end up being strung out on drugs and having huge identity issues and crises. I don't recommend this novel. I don't really get the whole slice of life obsession, to be completely honest with you. And I don't know, maybe you guys are having a way better time with Sally Rooney, but me personally, I'm not giving Coco Mellors any other attention. And the problem is that I've heard people talk about this book and say they love this book. And I'm like, what is there to love about it? And if I hear somebody go, just a conversation of, like, how imperfect life is, there are so many ways to talk about that and to have great writing. And I think reading this book, if it was maybe just an entire friend group that were all white straight people, I would allow y'all that conversation. But when Coco Mellors decided to introduce all these other identities and not know how to actually talk about them and talk about them being imperfect within life, which I guess is the whole point of this novel, then you haven't done what you came to do. Okay, that was basically my rant. I just felt like it was important to include that in here. I know I look a mess. I know that it's me just looking around and this is unedited and I'm blown out and whatever, but I just really felt like it was an important conversation to have in regards to those types of novels, those types of books, and why people get so upset about white authors and hetero authors writing characters that are outside of their purview of identity. It's not, no one's asking you to try and be a skillful writer and write other identities. It's that some of y'all don't know what you're doing. And that spot could have been given to somebody who knows exactly what they're doing if people wanted to read those stories. Okay, let's get to the end of the video. Thanks for watching this far. Bloom was all right. It was very... I feel like both Bloom and We Used to Live Here live in the same area where it's just simply, this would have been amazing had I not already known basically the story for one reason or another. So I don't want to sit there and say like these books aren't great, because they were good in their own right. I think that it was just simply the context of how I was reading them. Absolutely love this month. Cannot wait until getting started into next month. am going to go from this video into the next video for my February TBR, and I cannot wait to share it with y'all. I'm really, really excited. This would be extremely interesting because it's a long TBR and it's for the readathon, so expect nothing but black horror in my February TBR video that's coming up next. Thank y'all so much for watching. Thank y'all so much for subscribing. Thank y'all so much if you are participating in the readathon come this upcoming month. I cannot wait. I'm so excited. Please subscribe if you're not already, because there's gonna be tons of book content coming, and it's coming fast. Especially, I am staying on schedule for the readathon because there's recs coming every single week, and I need to kind of put things out in between all of that. So it's a lot, and if you don't subscribe, you're gonna miss all of it. And I'm hoping that it's entertaining enough that you wouldn't want to miss any of it. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you on the next one. Bye.